So hello everyone, welcome to our August Nature Talks. This talk is about the diversity of marine ecosystems in Nova Scotia. So this is our monthly talks, which we do on the first Tuesdays of every month with a rotating team. We are so lucky tonight, folks, to be joined by Sara Vanderkaden. Sara is a local super diver, a marine manager, and ocean explorer. In this talk, she will dive into the diversity of marine ecosystem here in Nova Scotia and share some of her cool stories from her experiences diving around the province. From visiting local shipwrecks to conducting scientific service for protected area planning, Sara's talks will highlight all that our ocean playground has to offer in both biodiversity and for our own well-being. So folks, if you have any questions, please send it in the chat and we will try our best to answer all your questions. We will be muting everyone so there's no disruption during the presentation. That said, if you're new here, folks, I will make sure there's some information about Nature Nova Scotia and how you can get involved more with nature talks in the future. I am so excited for this presentation tonight because I think the ocean is very unique and it is the heart of our planet. Therefore, I always love an opportunity to learn more about it and what action I can take to protect it. So Sara, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to marine management, and we can go right into your presentation.
Awesome. Thank you, Unity. I appreciate that. And thanks everyone for joining tonight. I'm excited to talk about the ocean and diving, which are my favorite things and kind of how I spend all my time. So I mean, we often think of Nova Scotia as Canada's ocean playground. And that's truly why I love to call Nova Scotia my home. I mean, for many reasons, but I spend my days working as a marine manager, and then when I'm not working, I'm exploring the ocean underwater. So yeah, I truly live and breathe the ocean in all walks of my life. So yeah, I can give a little bit of background about myself before I dive into kind of the bulk of what we'll talk about today. So I'm originally from Ontario, actually, and I moved out here about 4 years ago to start my Master of Marine Management through the Rhinophores program at Dalhousie University. And so that's kind of how I became a marine manager, and it's a very interdisciplinary program. So I came to it from a background, an undergraduate degree in marine and freshwater biology and international development. And that naturally kind of took me to marine management. So we often say that we don't manage the ocean, we manage the people. So I work for a company called Nexus Coastal Marine Management. So we're based here in Halifax, and we are an environmental consulting company, and we provide advice and research support to government, industry, community groups, and academia, just on all matters related to ocean marine resource management. So we work a lot in the areas of fisheries, marine spatial planning, marine protected areas, the blue economy, developing strategies for renewable energy in the ocean. We do a lot of engaging with stakeholders on issues related to marine management. We work with a lot of First Nation groups here in Nova Scotia on a lot of fisheries related matters. We do a lot of work in the Arctic as well, working with communities on climate change adaptation and interesting topics related to that. So yeah, and then when I'm not in my career as a marine manager, I am an avid scuba diver. So I got certified as an open water PADI scuba diver shortly after I moved to Nova Scotia about 4 years ago. And it's just completely taken off and changed my whole life. And I've logged almost 150 dives and just like really just over a year, really just dove in and gotten so into it, and it's changed my life in so many ways. It's really part of my identity now, and it really helps to shape kind of the work I do in my career as a marine manager, to be able to immerse myself in these marine environments every day and see what's going on with my own eyes. So that's a little bit about me. Thankful that diving has taken me all over the province over the last few years. So you can see that diving in Nova Scotia, people don't generally think of us as a scuba diving like tourist destination. When you think about when you want to go scuba diving, you think, oh, I'm going to go down to Mexico or find some beautiful coral reefs in the Bahamas. And even the dive shops here in the city, a lot of their business used to be people that would do their like classroom and pool kind of portion of their course here in Nova Scotia, and then do the go in the ocean down south where the waters are warm. People just don't generally think that we are a scuba diving destination, and fortunately, we are. There's so much ocean here in the North Atlantic to explore, and I've been so fortunate becoming part of the scuba diving community here in Nova Scotia to get to see these sites that very few eyes get to kind of experience, and I feel very lucky to be able to go to places that very few other people are able to access. So yeah, diving has taken me. A few weeks ago, I got to have my first diving trip up in on Cape Breton Island. We got to dive in the Bredor Lakes at a famous site called Grand Narrows. Got to do a dive right in Lewisburg called Gooseberry Cove, exploring some old shipwrecks up there. And then diving has taken me a lot. You can see a lot of the dive sites are kind of concentrated in St. Margaret's Bay area. We dive right in the Halifax Harbor when it's clean and everything's going well. Halifax Harbor, we dive a lot in the winter months when there's less boat traffic. The visibility is generally a little bit better, but there's so much life to explore right literally in my backyard, 5-minute drive from where I'm sitting right now. Diving has taken me all the way down to Yarmouth County. I've gotten to do some dives in Shag Harbor. So yeah, it's really connected me to the province that I now call home, and I'm very thankful for that. And I'll share a little bit throughout the presentation tonight about how we are really just trying to promote diving in Nova Scotia and let people know that there is all this amazing life underwater, just like 100 feet from where people sit on the beaches. If you just kind of immerse yourself underwater, whether you're snorkeling, free diving, scuba diving, there's so much to see and experience. And I'm really passionate about kind of opening people's eyes to that. And so yeah, like I come at what I'm talking about today here as a background in marine biology. Now I work in kind of the policy science interface, really helping to manage our oceans to be more sustainable and have a healthy relationship with the oceans. And I also have another kind of side hustle where I am an ocean educator to youth all around the world, kind of trying to foster those ocean connections, as I like to call them. And then obviously as a scuba diver. So I have this very interesting kind of lens by which I approach this talk today. But yeah, a lot of this is it's from the perspective of being a diver, seeing these ecosystems with my own eyes multiple times a week. Like I truly feel like the crabs that I dive next to every day are my friends, because I go to the same sites every season, multiple times a week. So I do really feel like I know these places, and I'm personally connected to them in many ways, which is quite nice. So yeah, so basically I want to share with you all today some of the exciting marine ecosystems that we have right here in Nova Scotia. And I am really only hitting the tip of the iceberg. When I was preparing the talk today, I realized that I could not talk about every species that I get excited to see when I go scuba diving. I'm truly touching the surface, and hopefully inspiring a few people to either learn more about what's underwater, or if you ever want to try scuba diving and see what it's like to breathe underwater, I'll give my contact information at the end, and you can experience these places for yourself. But yeah, today I'm going to share a little bit about eelgrass beds, artificial reefs, rocky reefs, and kelp forests, just to name a few of the exciting ecosystems that we have here in Nova Scotia. So yeah, one of the kind of the main ecosystems where a lot of our dives are in Nova Scotia. So mainly when we go diving in Nova Scotia, we just go right off the shore. And we're really lucky that we are able to access our shorelines, and we really try as a community to keep good relationships with homeowners that live near the shorelines that we enter the water in. So we'll enter the water right into these beautiful eelgrass beds. where they're often in Nova Scotia found in sheltered shallow bays. And eelgrass is really interesting because it's a little bit different than seaweed, because it's actually part of the only family of flowering plants that actually grow in the ocean. There's 72 species of these flowering plants, and eelgrass is the most common in kind of the North Atlantic, northern waters. Eelgrass has a lot of benefits to our ocean playground here in Nova Scotia. The term ecosystem services that it provides include, well, mainly its roots really stabilize the mud sand bottoms in these shallow bays that they exist in. Eelgrass also provides some coastline protection. It protects shorelines against storm surges, acts as that natural buffer. It cycles nutrients. It generates oxygen, and also is a remarkably good carbon sink for storing carbon, which is a new term that's being referred to as blue carbon. And it also provides remarkable nursery habitat for so many different young fish and invertebrate species, which as a diver, I get to really enjoy. A lot of the sites that we go to, we will just swim across the eelgrass beds and just get to admire the hermit crabs and the shrimp and different fish species that just hang out in the eelgrass beds. It provides them refuge, and even a place to anchor to, as I'll share in a little bit. So yeah, some of the cool, I just realized that I named this slide Eelgrass Invertebrates, and I have a vertebrate animal on the screen, so I apologize for that. It's really just eelgrass, invertebrates and vertebrate species, because fish obviously are vertebrates. Yeah, so these are just a few examples of the really cool species that you can find that call the eelgrass beds home. On the left here, this is called a bushy back nudibranch. I'm going to talk a little bit about nudibranchs in a second because they are my favorite animal in the ocean. And in the middle here, this is an ocean pout species, as you can see hanging out in the eelgrass beds. So ocean pout are a solitary bottom dweller fish species that are found kind of in inshore habitats from Newfoundland all the way down to North Carolina. And they, as you can see, are quite long, up to like 1 meter in length. And they kind of have this eel-like end to their fin, to the end of their body. They're super colorful, and sometimes they can be quite hidden in different boulders and in eelgrass beds. But this one, this was taken by a friend of mine, Malaya. He was colorful and ready to pose for a photograph. This was at a local dive site called Paddy's Head in Indian Harbor, right in St. Margaret's Bay. I should mention too, a lot of the photos that I'm going to be sharing tonight are taken by members of the Nova Scotia dive community, who I will give credit to. One of the main ones being a diver named Wayne Joy, and he has, his photos are all under the umbrella of Deep Perspective Diving. I'll share his information at the end, but he takes remarkable photos of really small invertebrate species and vertebrates too, but he's got a massive like macro lens. So he, like, for example, this nudibranch here is like 1/2 inch long, and his images are so powerful in being able to bring these creatures to life, right? And let people see all the remarkable kind of critters that live underwater, that I really enjoy as a diver, getting right up to them and kind of taking a look. But yeah, with the naked eye, sometimes you can easily miss them. So I appreciate Wayne letting me share his photos here tonight. So on the right here is an eared stalked jellyfish. And this image is kind of on its mouth end. And it has a stalk that it anchors itself into place right on the eelgrass bed. And I wanted to just highlight these photos too, because you can see that these are all animals utilizing the eelgrass. This is really showing how eelgrass provides really important habitat to these really diverse set of species. So this is not a typical jellyfish, and there's several species of stalked jellyfish that attach to rocks, eelgrass, as you can see here, or kelp. And they have this evolutionary trend that's almost like an anemone-like lifestyle, rather than a typical jellyfish, with an upward facing mouth and these oral tentacles that kind of resemble pom-poms. You could think of it that way. So they're quite beautiful, and we have a few species of those stock jellyfish here in the coastal waters of Nova Scotia. So I did say I was going to talk about nudibranchs a little bit more. I mean, I would be remiss to not mention nudibranchs because whenever I'm in the water, especially in the winter months when they are around a lot more, my friends say that I'm very slow because I'm just going very slowly looking for tiny little nudibranchs in the water, because I find them quite remarkable, and they are a true hit among divers or ocean enthusiasts across the world. So nudibranchs, if you've never heard of nudibranchs, they're soft-bodied shell-less snails. So essentially they're sea slugs, and they're found in marine ecosystems kind of throughout the world's oceans. So their scientific name, Nudibranchia, comes from the Latin word nudus, and the Greek word branchia means naked. Oh, sorry, the nudibranchia comes from the Latin word nudus and the Greek word branchia. And so collectively that means naked gill. And this is a reference to their exposed extremities that many nudibranchs wear on their backs. And you'll see that as I'm about to show some cool images of some of the different species of nudibranchs that we have here in Nova Scotia. So yeah, they're such a hit among divers because they come in all sorts of funky and diverse shapes and colors and sizes, and they've got a really interesting life history. So if like I was down in the Bahamas in February on a dive trip, and the nudibranchs there were super colorful and bigger, and I was also in British Columbia where the nudibranchs are like a few inches long. So the nudibranchs we get here in Nova Scotia are a lot smaller, but they are amazing nonetheless. And once you have an eye, and I call it like my nudibranch filter, once you know what to look for in the water, you can just see them everywhere and get really excited. So most nudibranchs are actually carnivorous, and they like to feed on sponges and hydroids, tunicates, and barnacles. There's at least 80 species of nudibranchs in the North Atlantic, and there's likely more that have yet to be discovered, which is pretty remarkable when you think about it just speaks to how much diversity there is here in the oceans, that we really we've only really reached the tip of the iceberg and really knowing what is under these waters and how like remarkably diverse our ocean ecosystems are. So the carnivorous nudibranchs follow two main body planes. So there's the dorids, which this is a white dorid here. So you can see that they're kind of flat with these rounded bodies. I refer to this white dorid as like a sea bunny. I find them quite cute, and they're very, very tiny. They are like a quarter, half an inch long. And then there's also the elids, which are elongate with large showy gills called serrata. So you can see like here are the exposed extremities that I was speaking about, and those serrata that are quite pronounced. And then nudibranchs use a pair of sensory tentacles on their head called rhinophores. So those are here. You can see very distinct in this. This is a dodo formosa nudibranch here in Nova Scotia. And those rhinophores, they're a sensory organ that helps them kind of sense their local environment. And because they're carnivorous, it helps them sense their prey. And so this here is a red finger alis. These ones are everywhere, especially in the winter months. They usually hang out on kind of rocky boulders. They like to hang out on algae. I've seen them on eelgrass. You can find them in a lot of places. So you can see all these kind of extremities along their body. These ones are super cool, and sometimes their bodies even look quite transparent. And so again, I just want to really emphasize how small this is. Like that, this imagery is so remarkable that it can kind of capture the beauty of this animal here. This is one of my favorite nudibranchs here in Nova Scotia. We call these Shag Rug Nudibranchs or maned nudibranchs. These are one of the bigger nudibranch species that we have here in Nova Scotia. I have only ever found these in the Halifax Harbor, and they're a little bit bigger. Like they could be a few inches long, so it's really exciting. And they love to snack on frilled plumose anemones that are very abundant in the harbor environment. So there's different. Wayne and I were on a dive, and we actually saw a Shag Rug Nudibranch really already kind of munching on the anemone. We saw it's kind of like planet Earth right in front of your eyes on a cool night dive. So I don't know where this specific nudibranch was taken, but I this was likely in Bedford or in Africville, which is a dive site among us divers in the Halifax Harbor. So they're a really cool one. So I hope I got everyone excited about nudibranchs. They sure make me excited. So we also get some really cool tropical visitors in the North Atlantic waters, and there's a bit of a reason for that. At the end of every summer and fall, that's the time of year we're lucky to get those tropical visitors into our waters, which makes all of us divers really ecstatic and excited when people find new species coming in that we can enjoy and explore. So, and I'm sure you'll be aware, if any of you have ever stepped into the North Atlantic in the winter and then in the summer, you will know the remarkable fluctuations in temperature that we have here across seasons. And yeah, during the winter months, the inshore surface temperatures get as low as 1 to 2 degrees, and then warm up to even subtropical temperatures up to 20 degrees by the end of the summer. And I can tell you that scuba diving in the winter months, we do it. We're a hardy bunch, but it is cold. You get used to it. But even this time of year, the water's still been quite chilly below the thermocline. We're still having temperatures about 7 degrees around St. Margaret's Bay below the thermocline. But it's nothing compared to those February days of 1 degree water. But yeah, so basically these really wide temperature fluctuations are largely driven by the southward facing Labrador current that comes down from the Canadian Arctic that you can kind of see here, blue in the image here, and then the northward flowing Gulf Stream that comes from equatorial waters, which is also kind of shown in this diagram here. And so these currents form what is called the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, or AMOC, which is essentially this giant conveyor belt of water that transports warm, highly salty water from the tropics here to the Northwest Atlantic, where it cools down, it becomes denser, and then it sinks to the seafloor. And then that current then like reverses in direction as it picks up nutrients and flows southwards to connect with the world's oceans. So this conveyor belt is a major player in regulating the global climate by the transportation of both heat and nutrients. And there's actually been concerns in recent years that this conveyor belt, the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, is actually weakening. And there's evidence to show that it's slowed significantly since the 1800s, in part due to natural changes and potentially being exacerbated by rising sea temperatures as a result of climate change. And so these changes, they may likely and already having consequences for the species distribution ranges that bring animals to our marine ecosystems here in North Atlantic. So for example, it could increase the range of tropical species that we might not have used to see, or even increase the amount of time that they spend in Nova Scotian waters. A lot of this research is of course ongoing, and people really smart researchers are learning more about this every day. But I just I wanted to talk about the tropical species visitors that we have here, because we're approaching that time of year soon. And it will be exciting, but it definitely makes you think about the broader picture, right, of what we're seeing in the ocean and why certain changes are happening. I always have that kind of lens that I look at things through. So one of the tropical species that we get really excited to see here in Nova Scotia is the line seahorse. So I last September, when divers saw the Seahorse at a local dive site in St. Margaret's Bay, the whole community was so excited, and people were racing to the dive site to check out the Seahorse because we knew it would only be here for so long. So yeah, seahorses have actually been documented during the summer months in the North Atlantic since 1866, interestingly. I apologize, it's a very shaky video. Oh, that's quite loud. But this, as you can see, this eelgrass, the seahorse is using the eelgrass. This is on a night dive too. That's why my light's just flashing on it. Yeah, hooking itself to the eelgrass there. So again, just another example of how important these eelgrass beds are for habitat of various species. So yeah, they generally attach themselves. There's a better photo. Again, this is Wayne, one of Wayne's photos. This was last fall. This is probably the same seahorse, but a better image than my video. So yeah, so they attach themselves to kelp or eelgrass, or even sometimes man-made structures like mesh or nets. They make great ambush predators, and they actually stun their prey by creating a current with their snout, which is quite interesting. Seahorses are sexually dimorphic, which means that it's generally easy to tell the difference between a male and a female, with the males being larger and carrying the brood pouch where the eggs will hatch into juveniles. So thinking about line seahorses being a more kind of tropical, subtropical species. So line seahorses, this species specifically, has a critical minimum temperature of about 10 degrees Celsius. So that means that by the time the water temperature starts to drop, by the end of October, early November, many tropical species, such as this line seahorse, will disappear after either being shocked by the cold or eaten by other species, as that return of the Labrador current kind of traps them in these waters well below 10 degrees. So I went and saw this seahorse a few times last fall, and he was looking more sluggish every time. And so as the water got colder. But obviously, as temperatures change, it might change the amount of time that species such as this can persist in North Atlantic waters, and it might have other consequences that I think we will have to learn about as a scientific community. And I think divers have value to add to that in seeing these species, day in and day out. So that's just a little bit of food for thought there. Yeah, so talking a little bit about reefs now, moving on from eelgrass beds. There's two main types of reefs here in Nova Scotia. So natural reefs, what you'll generally think of coral reefs, right? But natural reefs can also be made out of rock. So while we don't have coral reefs here in Nova Scotia, we do have many rocky reefs, as we like to call them. And a lot of that, so the rocky reefs, they are a main kind of character of a lot of the shore dives that we do around St. Margaret's Bay here, where they're just teeming with life that you can fit into the palm of your hand, including some of those invertebrate species I've already mentioned. And interestingly, we also have artificial reefs here in Nova Scotia. So an artificial reef is essentially just an intentionally placed structure that is designed to create habitat and in some cases restore parts of ecosystems. And so one of the most famous artificial reef systems for divers around Halifax is the HMCS Second A, which was a St. Laurent class destroyer that served in the Royal Canadian Navy and the Canadian Forces from 1956 to 1990. She's about 366 feet long and rests in about 90 to 95 feet of water leaning on the port side. So the HMCS Second A was intentionally sunk by the Nova Scotia Underwater Council in 1994 as an artificial reef. So this is the Second A when she was in action, and I've never known her like this. I've only ever seen her on the right image here, where now she is become habitat for a ton of sea life, where it's teeming with frilled anemones, cunnerfish, lobster, sea urchins, and many, many species of sponges, as you can see here. These are all frilled anemones, but they're closed when they're open. They're quite beautiful to look at. We've got lots of sponges. So the Second A is sitting just off the coast of Lunenburg. We take a charter out from down in Lunenburg, and it's become a very popular dive site for folks here in Nova Scotia. We also, I should mention, have many, many shipwrecks that were not intentionally sunk. I'm not going to speak as much about those shipwrecks today, but if you have any questions, I know a little bit about a few of them. I got to dive one when I was in two when I was in Cape Breton, actually. So yeah, the Second A is one of the most famous, like, intentionally sunk artificial reefs, but there is, with our maritime history here in Nova Scotia, there are like thousands of shipwrecks around the coast. And some of those also, a lot of those also make really, really great dive sites. But going back to rocky reefs, they're more typical of subtropical, temperate, and subpolar latitudes, as opposed to what we know about coral reefs that are in tropical waters. And so here in Nova Scotia, the granite rock really dictates the formation of these rocky reef ecosystems. We've got a lot of granite here in Nova Scotia. And these big rocky boulders attract many species of colorful algae, which makes these ecosystems a favorite among divers. So this image is of Paddy's Head, which I've mentioned a few times. It's a really classic, popular dive site here in Nova Scotia, not far from the city, which is a classic kind of rocky reef ecosystem. Where there's also a sandy bottom, there's also eelgrass beds. We get a little bit of everything in one dive site, which is really, really great. This, I believe, photo was taken from a dive at Cranberry Cove, which is really close to Peggy's Cove, and again, a very popular site among divers, with lots of algae, colorful algae to enjoy, and lots of critters that live in there. So I'm gonna go over two species that excite me that hang out in the kind of the water columns around rocky reefs. So not necessarily invertebrates that live directly on these boulders, but ones that you will find if you're lucky enough while exploring rocky reef, kind of sandy bottom ecosystems. I'm going to turn this sound low. So this video is of an Atlantic torpedo ray that this is me here being very excited that we saw our first torpedo ray on a dive. This was last month at a site called Birchie Head, down the Aspetuagan Peninsula, again, right in St. Margaret's Bay. Again, he's very big. He's very, very big. So this was a big kind of reef wall, like a rocky reef wall, and he was right at the bottom. Here's a better photo just to show you how massive torpedo rays are. They're actually the largest known electric ray, and they also happen to be the name of one of the local dive shops here in town that's called Torpedo Rays Scuba Adventures. So torpedo rays can grow up to 250 kilograms and up to 2 meters long. The one we saw, I don't think was quite that big, but exciting nonetheless. So torpedo rays are known for their powerful electric organs, which are large patches on the side of their head that can release a shock of up to 200 volts, which is pretty crazy. So they're found anywhere from about 10 to 2,000 feet, where they tend to hang out on the bottom during the day, like the video you saw. They was kind of just hanging out on the bottom, and then they feed at night, and that's when they use their electric organ to stun fish and small sharks and flounder and stuff like that. And then we have the lion's mane jellyfish, which is also a very exciting species. Again, this is another one I took on a night dive. I believe this again was at Paddy's Head. That's the site I keep coming back to. They're always very exciting to see. Lion's mane jellyfish have very, very long tentacles that they can get up to 30 meters, up to 100 feet in length. It's hard to even understand how long that is. They're one of the longest animals in the ocean. However, they can deliver a painful sting. So as divers, I mean, with any wildlife we see, it's a it's a leave only bubbles behind. Like I would never touch anything that I see in the ocean. So, but again, with jellyfish, you have to be especially careful to not get too close and get stung by a tentacles. I mean, one of the fortunate things about diving here in the North Atlantic is we are covered head to toe in neoprene exposure suits. So really around our lips is the only exposed skin we have in the water. So generally if divers get too close, it's their lips that they'll feel a little sting. So our exposure suits really do provide us protection from that. But yeah, these jellyfish produce larvae in the fall that attach and form an overwintering polyp and then divide off medusae in the spring. And so that's the time of year that we just see these jellyfish proliferate in the water column. So it's, again, like what I love about diving in Nova Scotia throughout the seasons is that there's so much seasonality with the species that you see in the water. So for example, like the nudibranchs are really, really common and abundant in the winter months. And then in the spring, we start to see jellyfish and a lot more fish species come out and about and be active. And even the colors change, just like we have colorful leaves here in the fall in on the land, we definitely see those changes underwater too, which is when I go to, like, I could go to the same site 20 times and it will be a different experience. And that's something that I really enjoy. So I wanted to talk about kelp forests before wrapping up, because it's interesting, like most of the diving I do in Nova Scotia is again in St. Margaret's Bay around Halifax. And I don't tend to see a ton of kelp or like kelp, anything that I would refer to as a kelp forest kind of diving around here. But when I was on my trip in Cape Breton a few weeks ago, I was just absolutely amazed at the abundance of kelp that we were able to dive in that site in Lewisburg, Nova Scotia. And that got me very excited to see that much kelp. And so kelp are a large brown algae species that really thrive in cold, relatively shallow coastal waters. So we tend to think of like the big kelp forests that we see like off the coast of California or British Columbia. And those are true kelp forests. But Nova Scotia has traditionally had very productive, diverse kelp beds and kelp forests here in Nova Scotia too, just a few different species. So the two main species of kelp that you will see are the broadleaf kelp and the sea colander kelp, which I'll share in just a second. So broadleaf kelp is actually a family of kelp. So there's a number of kelp species within this family. But they can grow up to 8 meters long, and they are characterized by a broad, flat blade that you can see here, and a branching holdfast that kind of is firmly attached to the bottom. So that anchors them to the bottom. And then we have sea colander kelp, and that can grow up to 2 meters long, and it has this characteristic like sieve-like blade that's perforated with these holes. And so they have a short and sturdy holdfast, not as long as the broadleaf kelp holdfast. But what's interesting about the sea colander kelp is they're a particularly hardy species of kelp, and they can persist in exposed kind of wave battered locations where other species of kelp might not be able to grow. And the reason that kelp are so important is that they are, like I said, one of the most productive ecosystems that we've traditionally had here in Nova Scotia. They grow in these dense groupings. Again, that's why they get their name, much like an underwater forest. That's where the term kelp forest comes from. They provide food and shelter for so many fish, invertebrate, and marine mammal species, similar to the importance of our eelgrass beds too. Unfortunately, though, the reality is, and like I said, like I was so amazed a few weeks ago in Cape Breton seeing this abundance of kelp is because they're particularly vulnerable to warming water temperatures, with Dalhousie University researchers estimating that kelp biomass has been reduced by about 85 to 99% in coastlines around Nova Scotia over the last 3 decades. So that's pretty remarkable to think about, and a little bit troubling. And it's interesting as a diver, again, like being part of the group of fortunate individuals that gets to see this, like that makes sense to me, right? Because I'm underwater in St. Margaret's Bay all the time, and I don't see it nearly as much kelp as I saw a few weeks ago in Cape Breton. So that got me thinking a little bit about that statistic. It kind of put it into perspective for me. And so specifically, the warm waters can cause the kelp to weaken and break. And what it's done is it's led to the warmer waters has enabled this proliferation of this hard calcified encrusting algae that's called the membranopora. And so what happens is it kind of can just cover the surface of the kelp, which can reduce photosynthesis. First of all, it can kind of foul that surface. And then what happens during storms, that hard calcified algae can cause the kelp to actually break, which can lead to the death of the animal. So we saw a lot of that membranopora when we were in that dive site in Cape Breton, which was a little bit concerning to see, but interesting to learn about too, because I didn't know too much about it beforehand. So just before I kind of wrap up today, I just wanted to kind of tie it back to how does all of this relate to scuba diving? Because I love the ocean in so many ways, but scuba diving is really my like avenue for being able to explore the ocean, and it's given me so much in that way. And this is one of my favorite quotes from the famous Jacques Cousteau: "The sea, once it casts its spell, holds one in its net of wonder forever." And for me, scuba diving has really been, again, like I say, like the avenue that's allowed me to kind of like live and breathe that quote, right? Like I just can't get enough. We go to the same sites time and time again, and there's always something new to see. It really, once you overcome all the challenges that come with scuba diving, it's not for everybody. I'm a believer in that, but I do think if you can overcome the challenges of putting on all the gear and learning how to be safe and comfortable in the water, it becomes the most meditative, relaxing experience that can really just quiet your mind and kind of help you be present and able to experience and enjoy the remarkable kind of diversity around you. And that's something that I'm really thankful for. There's a new kind of emerging field in neuroscience and biology. It's an interdisciplinary field, and it's referred to as the blue mind. It's actually a book by Nicholas Wallace called The Blue Mind, and it's really this new emerging field of science that's really exploring like the neuroscience and biochemistry of why being by water makes us feel so calm and peaceful and relaxed. And there's all sorts of interesting studies in this kind of blue mind field that I'm quite interested in. And for me, like scuba diving kind of makes me feel on my blue mind. If you think about it in contrast to like a red mind where we're in like a fight or flight state. And so I'm quite passionate about kind of sharing that blue mind aspect of diving with folks that you might not generally think of when you think about scuba diving. And then also it allows us to connect with our maritime history. Like I said, there's just so many shipwrecks in Nova Scotia. And before I dive any shipwreck for the first time, I get to learn the history and the story of the people and where they came from and what happened, how that's impacted the environment. To me, it's like time kind of stops underwater in a way, and you're able to be in front of the shipwreck that held, like, is so attached to this story and this moment in history. And so we're really lucky as divers to be able to get to kind of go back in time and see these shipwrecks and learn this history that very few people get the chance to see. And then I wanted to talk just a little bit about one of the other main tools that we use as scuba divers, which is diving against debris. So again, just like we're able to see shipwrecks that very few other people get to see, we also are able to see a lot of the garbage and pollution that ends up in our ocean that might be hard to clean up otherwise, right? Like much of the plastic that we produce ends up in the ocean. Whether it's even comes from inland sources that travel down streams and rivers, or it's directly dumped into the ocean. We as divers, we are kind of like the first-hand witnesses to this garbage. And so I think with that comes a responsibility to take care of these ecosystems that we get to enjoy. And I think, yeah, scuba divers definitely have a lot of responsibility in being part of the solution. And so we have tried really hard as a community to organize and host shoreline cleanups and underwater cleanups where we dive against debris. And there's a global database where there's really a protocol and a method for collecting garbage safely underwater. You can see that we collect all sorts of interesting things. There's also a treasure hunting kind of component of Dive Against Debris where you can find really old bottles with really interesting histories. We found some super cool, interesting stuff that we take to the museum. And there's, again, just like with the shipwrecks, there's an entire story attached to it. But basically we go, this is a few dive buddies and I, a few weeks ago, we were actually getting our Dive Against Debris certification, where we learned kind of the appropriate protocols for responsibly collecting garbage, making sure we're being safe, right? Like we don't want to put ourselves at risk by picking up a big piece of garbage. Some of the wharf dives we do, like I've seen people find stereos, toilets, space heaters. So definitely when you're doing a dive against debris, you don't want to take anything that you can't pick up. Otherwise, we'll get a lift bag and do that safely. But then we bring it all to shore and we organize it and we input it into this global database. And really, this is a form of citizen science when you think about it, because again, being my marine manager side, like this data that we're collecting can go into this large database, and it can actually help to tell us like what kind of garbage are we seeing in certain places, and we can kind of trace that back to the origins of where it comes from, and it can inform some decision making and policies around plastic. So for example, if we're finding a lot of debris that's related to fishing, maybe we can source back to where that's coming from, and then we could manage that fishery a little bit differently to try to reduce the amount of pollution that's ending up in the ocean. This photo on the right here is from a big event we've hosted at Point Pleasant Park back in June to celebrate Oceans Week. We had a shoreline cleanup and a dive against debris right on the beach there at Point Pleasant, where we had members of the public participating in the shoreline cleanup and some really awesome divers that went and also cleaned up some garbage. And we had ocean education and we had a big barbecue, and we're really trying as a dive community to get members of the public involved and to like build good relationships and everything, and again do our part to clean up some garbage. Yeah, so another thing that I've been lucky enough to participate as a diver, which again from my background in marine biology and as a marine manager, is something that I really enjoy, and I'm going to be starting my dive master training in the next few months, and scientific diving is going to be a key component of that. So that's conducting scientific dive surveys. So last summer, I actually got to go out with CPAWS Nova Scotia, and we did some dive surveys down on the South Shore in Port Joli, and we were really documenting species diversity and abundance. So we had full clipboards and cameras. We were trying to document everything, really just writing down every species you see, the relative abundance of that species. So again, we can go back to shore, we can do a full species identification with our ID books based on the photos we take to get a sense of what's down there, what's the diversity and abundance of all the species in these ecosystems. And then again, just with the dive against debris, we can use all this information to inform, in CPAWS's case, it helps them with a lot of their advocacy campaigns for marine protected areas across the province, and it could inform a lot of different kind of policies related to how we manage the marine environment. So I'm really interested in kind of both sides of it and how this information can be used to more sustainably manage our oceans. So I really like to be involved in the data collection side of it because I obviously just love being in the water and seeing these critters with my eyes. But yeah, there's all sorts of ways that scientific diver surveys can be really useful, because again, the divers are the ones that are there. We see it with our own eyes, and there's no reason that we shouldn't be collecting some information to be helpful to the management of our oceans. So that really wraps up what I wanted to talk about today. I hope I didn't go too long, but before I wrap up, I really just wanted to thank Wayne Joy from Deep Perspective Diving. A lot of those amazing macro shots you saw of amazing invertebrate life today are Wayne's photos. And if you're interested, he's got an entire inventory of beautiful photos. So you can find him on Facebook at Deep Perspective Diving. They've even got some of his photos up at Shaw's Landing really close to Peggy's Cove. Wayne's really a key member of our dive community here in Nova Scotia, and he's actually the vice president of the Nova Scotia Underwater Council for this term. And then I also wanted to give some thank you and credit to Dr. Chris Harvey Clark. His recent book that came out last December, I think this book was released, which you can see I have my copy right here in front of me, Maritime Marine Life. So this is a field guide that I come back to time and time again, and it helped to like when I see a new species in the water, I always have it in my car with me at a dive site. I get very excited to identify the species that I'm seeing in the water, and so that's been a major tool for us divers here. And if you're interested, there's copies sold all around the province, and I know at the 2 dive shops in the city here. Yeah, and then I just wanted to mention and kind of shout out the Nova Scotia Underwater Council. So they are a not-for-profit here in Nova Scotia, and really they were formed back in the 70s to really represent the Nova Scotia dive community. They were the body that actually organized and facilitated the sinking of the Second A as an artificial reef. And their current mandate is to preserve, support, and promote diving and diver education in Nova Scotia. So again, you can find them on Facebook. They are an active group of folks, and we're doing our part to kind of, again, just build good relationships with the community, like the public, and really tell people why diving is such a great sport. And there's so many amazing ecosystems and places to explore in the province. And you don't need to, I mean, going to Mexico and diving in coral reefs is a great time, of course, but you can go right into your backyard, and there's so much greatness to see. And we just really want to share that with folks. So with that, thank you. I just added my email, and I'm not very active on Twitter, but I do have Twitter in case anyone has questions after, or if you're ever interested in trying diving, I could totally set you up with some great people that could show you what it takes to become a scuba diver, or even just if you want to kind of learn more about the dive community here in Nova Scotia, I'd be happy to point you in the right direction or chat with you. But I think that wraps up what I wanted to say.
Thanks, Sarah. What an amazing talk. Thank you for all those information so much about marine management and Nova Scotia diverse ecosystem. Yeah, I have a question. So I'm not a good swimmer, and I think diving looks really cool, and I'd like to try it. Like, do I need to know how to swim to dive?
That's a great question, actually. So yeah, so basically when you become, PADI is one of the main kind of agencies that kind of is a certifying body for scuba diving. There's many of them, but PADI is the Professional Association of Divers. I should know the acronym better, but so to become a scuba diver, you do need a certification, right? It is considered an extreme sport. There's a lot of gear. So to do your open water PADI certification, you'll do a course, and it's generally over 2 weekends. So there'll be a classroom component where you'll learn kind of what is the physiology of being a scuba diver, right? Like the pressure in the marine environment is really high, and so our body does some funky things. You learn all about that. You learn all about the gear that you need to wear. And then you go out in the pool, and then eventually the ocean, and practice some skills to be safe. And there is a brief swimming test that is part of it, because again, you're in the water, and we want to make sure that we're being safe. I think it's like a 3-minute treading water. It's nothing. It's not like you have to be Michael Phelps to be a scuba diver by any means, but swimming is like a basic component of it. But that's not to say, so if you don't want to commit to an entire open water certification, you can do what's called a Discover Scuba Dive. And that's where it's about $40-50, and you will go out in the pool for a few hours, and you'll have an instructor that kind of just guides you through feeling the sensation of what it's like to breathe underwater without having to commit to an entire course. So the swimming requirements for a Discover Scuba Dive, I'm not too sure how strict they would be, but I do know, basic swimming test is part of the open water certification.
Okay, that's cool. I think Paula says that to become certified, you do need to be able to swim 200-meter independently and float for 10 minutes.
It's 10 minutes, not 3, 10 minutes. Yeah,
Oh,
that makes sense.
yeah, cool. So what are some of the action that we can take to conserve our marine resources here in Nova Scotia?
That's a great question. It's a good food for thought. I mean, I think first of all, I think I'm a believer in what we care about, we naturally want to protect. And I think a lot of people, I mean, maybe not the crowd here because we're all interested in these things, but if people aren't even aware of what's out there, they don't think twice about how their actions might impact that, right? So I'm really passionate about just kind of getting the word out there about how amazing our ocean ecosystems are, how diverse they are, and how sensitive they are. So I think kind of just raising awareness is like the first basic step that we can all do, right? Just to help people kind of connect those dots.
Right.
In But other than that, I think getting involved in communities such as this is great. I think, I mean, we could put our money where our mouth is, but I also just believe in kind of being aware, and I think the people we vote for too influence kind of how our oceans are managed for sure in many ways. And again, as a marine manager, I put on my like interdisciplinary hat, and that it's everything connects back to the ocean, right? Like whether you live in the middle of a landlocked country or we live on the coast here in Nova Scotia, like we're not separated from the ocean. And so I think again, it comes back to kind of like building that awareness.
Right. Awesome. So thank you again, Sarah, for this amazing presentation. It was very interesting and I learned so much. Oh, I think I have another, I don't know if it's a question in the chat. Paula says, don't have to be able to swim independently. The instructor will assist you during the entire confined water, i.e. pool and open water ocean dive. They
Mhm.
slash will essentially tow you around in the open water if necessary, if you can do it on your own. But it is different than swimming. You don't use your arms, just like.
Mhm. That is very true. Yeah.
That is interesting. Yeah, it looks, your picture looks really cool. And yeah, I'm looking forward to getting involved and
Yeah.
yeah, you inspire me. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Yeah. Please, anyone reach out if you're interested, or like you don't have to commit, even if you just want to learn more. We've got some amazing dive shops here in the community that are always interested in getting more people involved.
Awesome. And I think Paula says again, I guess that's for a discovery scooper.
Yes.
You don't become certified for that. Okay. Okay. I
Yeah.
see.
That's just to try it out for the first time, and I mean, ideally get people hooked so that they sign up for the full course and become an open water diver. And then there's it's a continuing education, right? So there's your advanced certification, your rescue. Then if you want to kind of get it down the professional stream, your dive master, and then you can eventually become an instructor. There's all sorts of specialties. So again, like you might have saw the picture of me under in the ice hole last winter. So ice diving specialty. Of course, you need extra training to be able to go into new environments and see different kind of things. So really what I love about scuba diving is the learning never ends. There's always more to learn and more places to explore. So yeah, it's really just again the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, awesome. So folks, if you don't have any question, I mean, we're on time, then we will leave it there for now. But if you have any more questions, we will definitely make sure you get Sarah's email. If you're not following Nature Nova Scotia, definitely do and check out our website, please. We will be back in exactly a month, the first Tuesday of next month, which is September, and we will be changing gear a bit, moving into some wetlands topics. So it's going to be great. So please tune in. Thank you so much again, Sarah, for being with us tonight. Great presentation. And yeah, I learned so much about marine management. And thank you folks for tuning in tonight. We will let you go.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.